Today, we're going to break down one of the most stunning economic reversals in modern history. We're talking about how a global powerhouse, a country that was once richer than most of Europe, fell into a century of crisis, default, and hyperinflation.
Just try to wrap your head around that for a second. It sounds completely insane, right? But this isn't some thought experiment. This was the brutal, everyday reality for millions of Argentines during the worst periods of hyperinflation. The value of their money, their life savings, just evaporated in minutes, not days. This chaos, though, it's really just a symptom of a much, much deeper problem.
So the big question is, how on earth did this happen? To really get what's going on with today's headlines, the economic shock therapy, the political drama, we've got to rewind the clock. We need to go back to a time when Argentina's future seemed absolutely limitless, a time when it was a magnet for the world's talent and capital.
Okay, let's dive into this golden era because you really need to see just how high Argentina climbed. It's a past that feels like it belongs to a totally different country compared to the Argentina we hear about today.
In 1913, this is where Argentina stood, 10th, the 10th wealthiest nation on the entire planet. Think about that. Its GDP per capita was actually higher than France's and Germany's. It was a true economic peer to the United States.
This incredible boom was fueled by what was basically a perfect storm of factors. You had the geography, these unbelievably fertile plains called the Pampas that turned the country into the world's breadbasket. You had the money, British capital just poured in to build a massive railway network. And you had the people, millions of European immigrants who provided the labor and the skills to make it all work.
And look, this prosperity wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Buenos Aires became a cultural beacon, a truly global city known as the Paris of South America. Its grand boulevards and theaters were the place to be for European elites. For a little while there, Argentina wasn't just rich, it looked like the future.
So here's the crucial point. This incredible prosperity, it was built on a very specific global system, one that relied on open trade and foreign investment. And that whole system was about to shatter into a million pieces.
The first domino to fall was the 1929 stock market crash. As global trade just collapsed, the demand for Argentina's beef and grain completely evaporated. And that economic crisis very quickly turned into a political one. The military coup in 1930 was the first big crack in the foundation, and it opened the door for decades of instability and eventually the rise of figures like Juan Perón.
So in response, Argentina's big idea was to turn inward. The new strategy was called import substitution. Basically, stop relying on the world, let's just produce everything we need right here at home. But this kind of protectionism came at a huge cost. High tariffs meant imported goods got way more expensive for everyone. And it choked off the very agricultural exports that had made the country so rich in the first place.
Perón's policies took this inward turn to a whole new level. He nationalized major industries, he dramatically expanded state spending, and, this is the most fateful part, he established a pattern that would haunt Argentina for generations to come. When the government runs out of money, you just print more.
Okay, so let's look at how this instability locked the country into this destructive, repeating loop. This wasn't just one bad decade. This became a way of life, an economic cycle of constant, unending crisis. This slide just illustrates the political and economic whiplash perfectly. First, you'd get a populist government that would crank up the economy with massive spending, which of course caused runaway inflation. Then, a new government would come in and slam on the brakes with brutal austerity, which would cause a deep recession. This stop-go cycle would just repeat over and over, making it impossible to plan for the future and scaring off any kind of long-term investment. And this cycle, it reached a horrifying peak under the military dictatorship of the late 70s and early 80s. On top of its brutal human rights abuses, the regime's economic mismanagement was just catastrophic. In only 8 years, foreign debt exploded from $8 billion to over $45 billion. And this really shows you the real-world impact on everyday people. Trust in their own country's currency, the peso, completely collapsed. People knew that any savings they had could be worthless by morning. So what did they do? They desperately exchanged them for US dollars, the only store of value they felt they could rely on.
By 1989, this toxic cycle of debt and money printing led to this number, 5,000%. That's not a typo. That was the annual inflation rate. Prices were changing by the hour. Your salary was practically worthless before you even had a chance to spend it. The entire economy just broke down.
So, faced with total annihilation, Argentina tried a radical short-term fix. They actually managed to kill hyperinflation, but in doing so, they planted the seeds for an even bigger disaster that would explode just a decade later.
The solution was to legally peg the peso 1-to-1 with the US dollar. And on the one hand, it worked like magic. Inflation basically vanished overnight. The problem? A super strong peso meant Argentine products were now incredibly expensive for the rest of the world. Their export economy got crippled, and to cover the shortfalls, the government just took on massive amounts of foreign debt.
But that peg was a ticking time bomb, and it couldn't last. By 2001, the dam finally broke. Argentina defaulted on this much debt, $100 billion. At the time, it was the largest sovereign default in the history of the world.
The collapse was breathtakingly fast. The government froze everyone's bank accounts, which led to massive riots in the streets. The political system completely imploded. They went through 5 different presidents in just 2 weeks. The economy cratered, and the middle class was basically wiped out, with poverty consuming more than half the population almost overnight.
So after this century of chaos, what are the key takeaways? What's the moral of this tragic story? Well, Argentina's decline isn't just history, it offers some powerful cautionary lessons for any nation out there.
Lesson number 1, and this is a big one, institutions matter. A lot. When Argentina's central bank was forced to just print money for politicians, all trust vanished. A stable economy absolutely requires institutions, courts, property rights, a central bank that are shielded from the whims of politics.
Lesson 2 is all about fiscal discipline. Argentina's story is a brutal reminder that you simply cannot print your way to prosperity. Using the central bank like a political piggy bank doesn't create wealth. It just creates inflation, destroying savings and hurting the poorest people the most.
And finally, predictability is just crucial. Argentina's constant pendulum swing, from total state control to radical free market reforms and then right back again, created this toxic environment of uncertainty. I mean, nobody, not foreign investors, not even its own citizens, is going to make long-term bets on a country where the rules of the game could be completely rewritten tomorrow.
And that brings us to today. With a new government once again promising radical, sweeping change, the world is watching. 100 years of potential has been lost to this destructive cycle. The question that hangs over 46 million Argentines is whether this is finally the generation that can learn from the painful lessons of the past or if history is doomed to repeat itself all over again.